Welcome back to another fun-filled episode of Interior Analysis. I'm David Jones, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
Yeah, I'm Evan Westman.
I'm Jelani Kelly.
And today we're tackling the movie that confused a nation on how time travel could theoretically work. It's in the hearts of many. It's inspired the neckbeards of 1,000 with an Adult Swim show. Yes, today our episode is Back to the Future.
That's a great opening.
Oh,
A lot of fanfare.
it is. Thank you. It is. I gotta give them what they want. Just start as we usually do. I'm just gonna go around the virtual table and ask everyone's first impressions of the 1985 classic Back to the Future. So take it away.
I guess I'll start. I think I'm the only one of us that hasn't seen this before. I'm gonna start with some stuff I knew going into this. I knew Professor Plum was Doc. I knew he said Great Scott. Michael J. Fox was in Scrubs. I know at some point the kid's mom tries to bang him, and that's all I knew going into this. I thought it was PG
I think it is.
for some reason.
I think it is.
Okay,
It is.
Great. Okay. Why?
Well, I want to get into that
Okay.
too, because to me it feels like PG-13.
Yeah.
But
Our Avengers theme guy scored this. I know this was a Rick and Morty inspiration, and I didn't realize they literally only changed one letter for Morty. I like that Marty isn't a loser. I feel like he's an 80s rom-com character at like the end of his arc, but it's at the beginning. Kinda. Like he has all his confidence. He's got the girl. He's got it. He's got it all. I was worried the only black person I was gonna see was on a van, but nope. We got to see some of him in the past when he was working for that white ice cream shop guy. So that was fun. And his name was Goldie, and he had a gold tooth. Representation matters. Sponsored by Toyota. Then we met his dad, and I was like, oh, his dad's a loser. Great. Also, the bully's name is Biff. I think that's by far the dumbest name I've ever heard for any character. Ever.
It is kind of a 50s name, though. Like, you could name your kid weird
Pow.
things back in the day.
Was Pow taken? What about Kablooey? Was that taken? What are some other Batman action sound effects?
Zow.
Yeah, all of that. Zap and
Blam.
Ram. Were those taken?
Shakapoo.
I don't know about that one.
Onomatopoeia.
Fox did not look like he was in high school when they filmed this. Crispin Glover, the dad, he was he was Biddleman and Like Mike. I don't know if anybody here knows that movie, but that's like
Yes.
that's one of my favorite childhood movies.
That's actually a good one for a watch along at a future
Ooh.
time.
I haven't seen
Yeah.
that. I've just heard of it.
Yeah, Like Mike is that okay? Add that to the list, Evan. Like Mike.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be for this first one, but. And then I thought, oh, they killed Doc. Isn't this a PG movie? LMAO. And then once the end hit, I realized there wasn't any blood when he got shot, huh? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. After arriving in the past, why didn't he just stop the fucking car? Why did he kept his foot on the gas, and there was a good number of yards. He just kept driving until he ran into the poor family's shack. So that was cool.
In his defense, he's trying to... I hear you there, because I don't think he tries to put on the brakes, but in his defense, he is going 90 miles an hour and trying to go to a complete stop. That wouldn't happen instantly.
That's a DeLorean, Evan. You don't think it's capable of that?
Brake pads in the 80s, I don't think were at their peak.
Existing?
They might not have been existent, yeah.
This is a side note, but not really. This movie would be extremely different if Marty was black. Just saying. The stuff with his mom was worse than I thought. The dinner table scene, and then it just ramped up from there. I was like, alright, man, why? And then I realized that was going to be the whole movie, so that was interesting. And then, like, halfway through the movie, I thought, how the hell did Doc and Marty meet? I don't remember if they mentioned that. I changed the words when I said smash here, but I said Biff was gonna smash his mom, fam, WTF. You know what smashes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the climax drags on for way too long for me. With like the lightning and all of that. Like I had been checked out. Like once he fixed the thing with his dad and mom getting together, I was like, all right, this movie can end now. And then it was like a whole nother half hour after that. I was like, all right, we don't need any of this. So yeah, those are I read. I didn't plan on reading through everything, but I did. Those are all my initial reactions.
I just dropped a link in the chat. I think you would find John Mulaney's stand-up bit about this movie very cathartic because he addresses a lot of that, the stuff you were talking about there.
You want me to watch it while we're
No, after. I'm gonna reference it later because it's really great and actually one of the best assessments I've ever heard of this movie. David, are you familiar with that at all?
No, I haven't watched it yet, but I'm really excited to see it.
Evan, your turn.
I saw this for the first time when I was probably like 10, which in hindsight, considering like the stuff I wasn't allowed to watch as a kid, is a little surprising. But we did kind of have a kick for a while where my parents showed me a lot of 80s movies. And this was never like, I enjoyed it more as a kid than I do now for sure. But it was never like among my favorites. I mean, even among like, I think the far superior 80s time travel movie is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yeah, I watched that one. That was good.
Oh, you did? Oh, dude. I'm so happy for you.
I don't remember much of it, but I remember liking it when I saw it.
I'm so happy to hear that you've seen that. I think I've seen this probably 2 or 3 times since then. It's definitely gotten worse for me. I wouldn't say I hate it right now. I wouldn't even say I dislike it, but I feel safe calling it quite overrated. Also, this time watching it, I watched it with my roommate who's an electrical engineer, and they were very vocal about how inaccurate some of the like science stuff is. They kind of went off about how a capacitor is totally not like what the flux capacitor is. And I believe they were wearing a t-shirt with a capacitor symbol on it at the time. They were very vocal about...
How would he know?
Well...
How would he...
She's an electrical engineer. Like,
they could just be making it up, you know?
We had a whole discussion about this a couple hours ago. Because they were saying, like, there were other terms that would have actually made more sense. Like, I can't remember which ones. But... I was like, they would always go back, like, it would have been like flux resistor, flux, I wish I knew electrical terms. But I was like, they always were going to name it the flux capacitor because that sounds cool. If you named it something different.
No, it doesn't.
But for a science word, like, it's a very science-sounding word. And other science words don't sound as sciencey. So they wouldn't have used it, was my argument. They were very upset that, things were not scientifically accurate.
For an 80s movie.
By the person who made Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Right.
The Polar Express.
So the peak of accuracy is what we expect from Robert Zemeckis.
What else we got? We got, what's that? Forrest Gump? Yeah.
Oh, that too.
Yep.
He just likes Tom Hanks, huh?
He might be in love with him. You heard it here first. What else did he do? He did that weird, like, CGI Beowulf.
Oh,
that, like, looks like the Polar Express.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hate that animation style so much. Like,
Where they try to make them look real?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Like, why? Just, like, at this point, also, like, I feel Pixar, like, when I watched Soul last year, this is a tangent into animation, but I was like, their animation is so good. I feel like they're doing things to remind us that this is animation, because, like, New York in that movie just looks like New York, but they just make the people's heads shaped a little weird so that you're like, oh right, this is animated. But they could probably make it all photorealistic if they wanted to, because like it's that good now. In 2003 it was not.
My first impression, I wish I knew which number of time watching this film this is for me. I rented this movie as a child, Blockbuster. And it was like, I'd always rent like 2 or 3 really awful horror movies that like no child should be allowed to rent. and then like one kids movie. And I would often go to like Back to the Future, The Goonies, Dunstan Checks In, written by Bruce Graham, We See You. I would go fluctuate. I would go through a lot of kids movies. And this one I enjoyed. Rewatching it as an adult, I'm really shocked that it's rated PG. It is so not a PG movie, especially in atmosphere where PG-13 was already created. So I figured they would have used it, but they didn't.
It was brand
I don't
new
know.
at the time, though. It would have been less.
Yeah,
than a
it
year
was
old,
a
I
year
think.
old. They made it in 84 and this came out in 85, so it's still fresh. But I'm just surprised because the subject matter does get so mature at sometimes. Like there is this, I don't know if it's true. Yeah, because sometimes it's really like crazy light, and you know Doc Brown's like, I hit my head on a toilet, and he's like holding Thomas Edison's photo, and he's like, Tom, what do I do? And then other times someone's attempting rape.
I had a major problem with that this time too. Like, and I think I did probably bump on it like whatever the last time I saw this was. I think I might have been like 17. I don't have a problem with how it's like a time travel movie. That's...
Oh God, I thought you were gonna say something else. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Good.
I'm not gonna ask. What, I'm not gonna ask what.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with the fact that it like is a time travel movie that kind of cuts some corners and like has a kind of cartoonish tone. That's fine. I also don't have a problem with a time travel movie doing this like incest undertone thing, but they shouldn't be in the same movie. I think it makes sense that somebody would want to, like, when you're doing time travel things, it would make sense for someone to go like, hey, what if you went back in time and one of your parents is attracted to you? Wouldn't that be awkward? Like, somebody's gonna inevitably make that movie. So, okay, fine.
What?
Do it, just, like, but here's the thing. I wouldn't make it, but obviously somebody is going to, inevitably. So, just don't make it a kid's movie with a cartoon tone. And, like, maybe don't have an attempted rape scene be at the center of it. Mm-hmm. Those are things that, like, I think it's okay if that's in a movie, but then don't deal with it like it's Looney Tunes. Because it kind of deals with it like it's Looney Tunes in this. I'm not saying this needs to be, like, canceled because of it or anything. It really is hard to get past.
Yeah.
So, and, like, I think this would make sense in a Rick and Morty episode, which obviously, like, there are ties between that. But, like, that's a show that is a cartoon made for adults. So that just works there tonally and, like, audience-wise a lot better.
Big mouth.
Haven't seen it, but that sounds like, yeah, something they would do.
I mean, since we're talking about it, we could just talk about it. They go back in time, so you hear the whole... When I watch people talk about this movie, everyone likes to point out, like, this movie's taking the age-old question of, if you went back to high school with your parents, would you be friends with them? And I'm like, it does do that at certain points, but there are other points where it does get a little Oedipus complexy.
More than a little. I mean, it's all undertones,
cheap,
but, like, it's really obvious undertone.
Kisses.
Yeah. And I just wonder, and I mean, the movie has had incredible financial reception, critical reception from fans. It's sustained adaptations. Ronald Reagan quoted it in a 1986 State of the Union speech. There's deep fakes of Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland. And it's not just that. Psycho has it, and that's one of the most studied movies of all time, most famous movies, like one of the most famous directors of all time. Oedipus, that play itself with Sophocles. Why do audiences attach themselves to these storylines so heavily?
I don't know why, because I personally don't. I think some of it's nostalgia, because at this point, like, the 80s is a thing.
Incest nostalgia?
No.
Incest nostalgia.
Should have maybe
Incest
given
nostalgia hits different.
Should have maybe ordered that differently. But I mean, my parents showed me this movie because it would have been like 2009, and they were like, "Oh, this is a cool movie from when we were kids, like nostalgia for us." And also, this came out in a time where it's like they would have been nostalgia for the 50s back then. So it's like, oh, cool. Here's like the diner, and coffee was 5 cents or whatever. I don't know if 50s nostalgia hits in this movie.
And black people weren't allowed.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, not nostalgic for everyone in the 80s. I think some of it's nostalgia. I really don't have an explanation for the Oedipus stuff. Like,
Does anybody?
I don't need an explanation. Like, you didn't write the movie.
well, I think there's an explanation out there, but I don't
floating
know
the question.
what it is.
Like, how do we feel? Like, I'm curious about it.
It's gross.
It is gross, but it's so prevalent in all of our entertainment, and it's so interesting.
Is it?
Yeah, some of the most. You don't think the Oedipus complex is rampant?
I'm thinking of current movies now.
Yeah, I don't think you would do this today, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But here's one thing that it does do, and I'm not saying this as like an excuse. What it does do is create a dramatic tension that like keeps you interested.
I mean, sexual tension.
That too. But I mean, even as a 10-year-old, when I didn't really understand what was happening, I still like kind of understood like, oh, his mom likes him. Isn't that awkward? Like that still registered for me, and I don't know if it made me interested. It does keep your attention. That's about the best I can say for it, I think. You still don't need to, like, again, don't do it in a movie for kids. Like, if this is, who's the guy who does all the comedies? Judd Apatow. That's who it is. Like, Judd Apatow doing that, like, for an adult audience, just, it has a different undertone. And I think that would just work better tonally. I don't think this should be marketed to the same audience as Goonies, is the thing. You could still make it, and I think that's fine. But, and granted, we're also looking at this from, what is it now, 35 years, 37 years out of context. Like, I guess this flew better in the 80s. I don't know.
I thought he got a hoverboard in this one. Where's the hoverboard?
Believe that's the sequel that takes place in 2015, which I haven't seen.
Don't they also go to like Yeehaw Times, where it's like a western?
Yeah, I think that's the third.
Yeah, that's the third one.
David, have you seen those?
I have seen those. They are pretty wild.
Yeah, I remember. I've never seen them, but one of my best friends as a kid loved. I think Back to the Future was his favorite for a time, and I remember him describing the plots of them to me, and then I've just like seen them referenced other places, so I like vaguely know what happens in the sequels. And then I remember in 2015 there was the day that like Marty goes to, and people were like comparing like what came true and what didn't from like what they predicted in that.
Okay, well, now that we got the overbearing weight of incest and rape out of the way, we can talk about maybe something a bit more enjoyable to discuss. We'll just go through the movie. I separated it, the first thing, into the opening sequence. I think of Greenberg when I watch movies like this.
Like David, the professor?
David Greenberg, yeah. Because he didn't push this movie, because he had his favorites that he liked to use as examples, but what he would always say and what he would love to see, like, I feel like this movie exemplifies that, because it's like the basics of screenwriting being put to the test and the fundamentals, and sometimes, and clearly it works. And the opening scene is just that to me. You get a clue into who Marty is, you get a clue into who Doc is, you also understand their dynamic. They start to set up the kind of joke dialogue that they carry throughout the movie where, you know, Marty gets flustered or confused, and then Doc says something, and then Marty's like, wait, Doc, are you telling me? And then asks like some really obvious question so the audience knows what's happening because it's not making any sense, and then Doc's like, yes, Marty, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And we understand it's a little bit wacky with all the clocks and him turning up the amp and playing the guitar. And you get his vibe. You get what he wants to do. He likes music, the skateboarding, him being late, him not being responsible. And it kind of starts the ball rolling. Now, I wonder if you guys, when you watched it, were you like, yeah, this is a pretty fundamental, basic opening sequence, gets the job done?
I just wanted them to get to the past. I wanted them to time travel. But I know the setup was necessary. That's it. I didn't really think much of it. Mainly, I was just thinking, okay, this is all necessary. This is all character stuff and plot stuff because there's some things going on, things being explained prior to the time travel, but mainly I was just waiting for the DeLorean.
I guess I kind of had a similar reaction at first. If you're talking like the very opening scene in the garage, I've never seen that as particularly impressive or like notable. But now that you're saying it, it does kind of feel like an A+ version of like the screenwriting one assignment where the professor says, go make a scene where we learn a lot about a character without seeing them, just from like the environment. That like, because we do learn a lot about Doc Brown in that like first shot where it's like panning across his like invention thing that does all his morning routine for him, whatever. Like, we are learning about him without seeing him there. So that does feel like very screenwriting one basics kind of stuff. Aside from that, like, I think it's functional at setting up Marty. And, you know, probably better than functional, but nothing noteworthy.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but I just think sometimes when you're making just like a genre movie like this, if you just execute the fundamentals and you do it well, that's hard enough.
Yeah.
It's enough for me to sit back and be like, okay, so this movie that did that. So that's how I wasn't blown away by it like how Marty was when he played the guitar, because he flew backwards. It was just, screenwriting 101. It's a great, for anyone who wants to get into screenwriting, it's a great scene to just read and be like, see, Jelani's there. He got it back in time. Get it? Yeah. That's good. The other thing that I really took of notice is the music, and that's just because I watched, I don't know whose talk show it was, but he was on it, Huey Lewis, and it wasn't his band, it was just him. But he was talking about how he wrote the whole soundtrack for this movie specifically. And I feel like that's something I see much more common now, but I don't really know a lot of movies that got like a rock and roll star back then to just write a whole soundtrack. And it was interesting. It definitely captures the 80s rock feel, in my opinion. But again, it's not like anything like Mozart or Maestro crafting like a beautiful score, but it did, I think, do the job that they wanted him to do.
I think it's very 80s. Like, 80s scores in like other movies are, I'm just gonna say it, they're pretty bad. Karate Kid's a fine movie, but the score in that, like all the synthesizers, it's like, oof, it's rough. So I think
I'm watching Cobra Kai now. I like it. I didn't see the original movies, but I'm liking Cobra Kai on Netflix. It's cheesy, but I like it.
That checks out with what I've heard from other people. I think this is better for relying more on soundtrack, probably because, 80s rock is, I would say, is a pretty solid genre, so it's always a decent fallback. I remember I added Johnny Be Good to my first iPod that I had, because I had one of those older iPods around the first time I saw this movie, and I know that was on the one playlist I made. The Power of Love, still a pretty good song. I don't remember anything else from it.
Only time I paid attention to music was when it was focused on in the movie. Normally background music it in my head. It just goes in the background. I don't really notice it. The scene where he's playing the guitar, I didn't really have a choice but to listen there. So it was cool though. I was bopping my head, and then Michael J. Fox went off script and started shredding.
He did. He did.
I would say you don't really need the Johnny B. Good scene to be in there. Like, I don't quite understand why they wanted to go as hard as they did with, like, hey, it's your brother Marvin Berry. Listen to this. And it's like Chuck Berry is hearing the song that he wrote. Like, what does that do? I don't understand why they did that. Like,
it was his cousin.
Right, but his cousin calls Chuck Berry on the phone and like plays him his own song. Like, why? Why not just have him play like Van Halen and call it good?
I don't know what that is.
You don't know what Van Halen is? Jump?
Isn't that a band?
Okay. Wow. I'm a little surprised.
I don't know. I was born in the 90s. And
I know,
was born in the late 90s. Wait, I'm the oldest one here. Oh, shit.
Yeah, we're all born in the 90s, but you've never heard Jump by Van Halen? I find that kind of hard to believe.
I don't know what that is.
You've definitely heard it just like walking in a mall at some point. There's no way you guys would be, what are you, 25 now? 24?
24, let's not jump up my age just yet.
Okay.
72.
There's no way you've gotten to be 24 and I can believe that you don't know what that song is, but you have definitely heard Jump by Van Halen.
You keep saying the full name like this is gonna jog my memory.
I'm not expecting it to. You just go listen to the song. You've heard this before. That doesn't matter. Anyway, he could have played some other 80s rock song and not... I don't understand why.
Not Johnny Be Good.
It's a great song. So, yeah, keep Johnny Be Good.
What about...
By all means.
What about Jump from Van Halen? I think that would have been a good song.
Yeah, you definitely...
That's an inspired choice, Jelani. Right on you.
Yeah, took the words right out of my mouth. You could keep Johnny Be Good there, though. I don't understand why they were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool? Like, that just creates all sorts of time travel problems, too, where it's like, so does Chuck Berry only know Johnny Be Good because Marty wrote this song? Or has Marty heard Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, plays it in the 50s, and now in this new version of the 80s, like, Chuck Berry still wrote that song, but didn't actually? Like, what does that do? I just don't understand why they decided to do that.
I don't know any of these names. You might as well be speaking a different language.
Well, it's the song that he plays.
You got Johnny and Chuck and Van and some person named Jump. I don't know all these people ever. Were they in the movie? I don't think they were in the movie.
Marvin Berry is in the... Forget it. Just... People who are listening know what I'm talking about. I don't need to explain this to you.
But that is a good point, and that is something that I think has kind of become a meme of and onto itself, and has been, for better or for worse, Back to the Future has kind of become a standard in time travel, because people always are like, are we going to Back to the Future it? Meaning, are we going to just have no consequences and have no reason for any of this and just confuse everyone? Or are we going to try to have some sort of explanation and rule to follow? And it's interesting. I don't know why they just run with it, but there's a few times throughout that movie where I just wonder, like, Marty wearing the Calvin Klein underwear, and he says he's Calvin. Like, when Calvin Klein underwears come around, is the mom just not going to be able to associate it? Like, is she going to forget? Like, what is she going to have? Like, what is that weird Bernstein effect? Is she gonna have a Bernstein effect? Is she gonna be like, where is it the Berenstein Bears or the Bernstein Bears?
Oh no.
Mandela effect, that's it. Is she gonna have a Mandela effect? I don't know. And then like him even saying, I understand it's supposed to be a sweet moment, but again, it just, if you think about what the movie, just about the movie, him being like, you know, if you ever have a son and when he's 5, he sets the carpet on fire, go easy on him. And then when that happens, are they gonna have deja vu? And the mom's even like, ooh, Marty, I like that name.
Right.
And then there's the big one that everyone talks about, which is him inventing the skateboard. So like, did Marty McFly just invent the skateboard when he ripped that thing apart? I don't know.
Yeah, I the one that I bump on the most out of those is her deciding to name her kid Marty again, like, it's very strange.
But that's a strange thing for like any normal human to do, though. Like, imagine like getting with like your lover, but you name your kid after somebody you knew in high school. What? Like,
yeah, who you knew for a week?
Who?
Right.
Although, I suppose you could
that?
argue that, like, in this new version, Marty is, like, the reason that George and Lorraine got together in the first place. So I suppose you could argue for that. But even so, it's a little weird. And they don't name their... I don't know what the older brother's name is, but Marty's the youngest. So it would kind of make more sense for them to name the oldest child that. I don't know. It's strange. And you could even, like, forgive it if you just cut that line. Marty, that's a nice name. Just cut that out and nobody has a question there.
This is a whole lot of other unanswered questions, though.
Yeah. If we're on time travel questions, I don't know if this exactly falls under that, but one thing that has stood out to me, and it's not a deal breaker, but I've found it very convenient that every significant thing in the parents' life, Doc's life, and the town all happens in the same week in 1955. That's a little convenient.
No, that's great writing.
I'm not saying it's, like, terrible, but, like, when you take a step back, it's like, okay, this 1 week in 1955, Doc Brown discovers, like, gets the idea for time travel. Also, the lightning strikes the tower. Also,
The Under the Sea
dance, yeah. And I think there's another one that I'm not thinking of. But maybe, even if it's just those three, that's kind of a stretch. Like, two of those things, because we do get the setup at the beginning where the parents say, like, remember it was our first dance the night that the clock tower struck, or the lightning struck the clock tower. So they do establish it beforehand. So it doesn't feel that weird, but I've always felt like that was just a bit much. Is it okay if we get into setups and payoffs? Because that kind of ties into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because setups and payoffs is, like, the main writing technique that I feel like this movie accomplishes the most. Because everything that happens in 1955 is set up in 1985. Like, that's pretty obvious. But they do a really good job of making the exposition in Act 1 feel organic. So that way it feels natural in Act 2 when he goes to the past. And, like, you get... I think both of you mentioned this before. Like, there's pretty good exposition about, like, how we see his parents' dynamic, his dad's relationship with Biff, and then we go to 1955 and see, okay, it's always been this way. And you even get a couple of smaller things like the principal, who's apparently always been bald or whatever. I'll ask this question and then answer it, and then I want to hear both of your answers. What do we think the usefulness of setups and payoffs in this movie are? I think the thing it accomplishes the most is that it shows how everything stayed the same. It makes everything feel kind of cohesive, like you feel closure at the end because it doesn't really leave anything hanging. But I almost want to say that like the reason it feels so satisfying is just because of how many things are set up and paid off. Like the quantity, I think, is why we remember it over the quality. Like, I don't know if it necessarily lends any greater meaning to like the things that are set up and paid off, but I could hear arguments against that. So what do you guys think? What do the setups and payoffs, how do they benefit or detract?
I didn't care. I said earlier, once the parents were together, I stopped caring. And then Marty had the whole thing about trying to warn Doc, and he was trying to get him to let her, but Doc was like, "No, I don't want to know about the future, Marty." I didn't care. And then he was like, "I wore a bulletproof vest. What the hell, right? Haha, screw time travel."
That I think is the most 1980s aspect of this movie. Is at the end, it's like they give no reason to why in 30 years' time Doc decided to change his like strongest principle in time travel, which is already super flimsy to begin with in this movie. And then he's just like, I figured, what the hell? And then the music plays, and I'm like, oh, this is 80s to a T.
If that came out like that same thing happened in a movie today, it would be instantly memed.
Oh yeah, it would be a laugh riot in the theater.
I also question, should this have caused a time loop? Because Marty saw
It should.
himself, and then that also made me question, has the movie ever done time travel well? Find out next week on Dragon Ball Z.
Oh god. Setup and payoffs for me in this movie, I agree. The movie's riddled with them. I think that's the movie's main function. I don't mind it because they're pretty not like obvious about it, but they're just like, this is what the movie is. So like, you can take it or leave it. And for what it's worth, I like you said, I think they do a good job masking it with the dialogue and whatnot, and clever enough in set design. So when the parallel moments happen in the past, like at the dinner table in the 80s versus the 50s, there's enough kind of circularity for the audience to just kind of subconsciously take it in. And I think that's a triumph to that art department, because everything with, I think it's the honeymooners they're watching and like the rolling TV to like the placement of people sitting is very well done. But yeah, I don't think it's anything like groundbreaking or anything that really warrants a super deep analysis. I think it's pretty on the surface with all of its callbacks and payoffs. When you see Marty and he's like, I don't know, what if they don't like what I'm gonna give them or whatever, and then he goes back in time and sees his dad say the exact same thing. It's like the movie's not being shy about it.
Some of the setup with Marty is the only place where I feel like there's setups that aren't paid off. So like obviously there is the thing where he's like, I don't want to send in the record, and then you have the dad, I don't want anyone to read my books because like I can't face that kind of rejection, whatever. I think that line is a different place, but
yeah, that's what they both say.
But there's setup, like Marty says it, and I think the principal and maybe one other character says in 1985, like Marty's turning out like his dad. But then the reason that Marty screws up, like the way his parents met and all that, is because he's not like his dad. So I don't quite understand why they feel the need to emphasize or like tell us that, man, he's turning out just like his dad, except clearly he's very different when you compare the two of them in the 50s.
Crispin Glover hams it up.
Yeah.
He does.
To an extreme degree. Jesus, man. Like, I don't think
Give
I've
me
ever
milk.
seen...
Chocolate.
Oh.
When I watched it again, I said that line. I said chocolate.
I mean, he doesn't ham it up any more than the dude who plays Biff.
No, Biff was... I don't want to say better, because
No, Biff is definitely the campiest one. Biff is schoolyard bully personified. Hey, butthead. Knock, 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 knock.
But Crispin, when he's at the dinner table before Marty time travels and he's laughing at the TV.
Oh my god, when he laughs at the TV. And with his son kisses him on the head, and he's like, ooh, you gotta like loosen up that oil or whatever. And he goes,
Well, there was such a thing in the 80s of like aggressively lame dads. Like you have the Ferris Bueller's dad is a huge example.
Jesus Christ.
The dad in Goonies in like the 3 moments he shows up is definitely in there. I think the dad in 16 Candles probably falls into that. Bill and Ted's dad's not so much, but that's also late 80s. But like that was kind of a thing in that era.
Were the actors like old or young in this movie? Did they just put makeup on when they were young or old? Because they clearly got both actors to play the younger and older version of themselves, but I don't know which.
They put makeup on. Crispin Glover would have been 2021 at the time of filming.
Oh, so they put makeup on to seem older.
Yeah.
So when they were younger, that's how they really looked.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Biff they made look younger, because he looks the oldest out of the three of them. And then they didn't even bother with Christopher Lloyd. He's just the exact same in both eras. Doc Brown.
Oh, well, he said he had more hair, so there's that.
Yeah, but it's not even that much more.
You think Doc Brown is just Professor Plum, but he changed his name?
Well, he definitely is. He's also the bad guy from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh yeah, the judge guy, Judge something.
He's the evil tune.
And the angel from Angels in the Outfield. That was the first thing I saw him in.
Wasn't Danny Glover in that?
I think so. And very
What am I
young
thinking
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Wow.
What were we talking about?
The actor's age.
Oh yeah.
If we're okay with that, I had one more question for setups and payoffs. I wanted to ask, like, what do we think the purpose of setups and payoffs are in just storytelling in general? Like, why is it a thing we should do? Or is it that important?
To make the audience feel accomplished for watching the movie. Hey, that problem got solved, and now I feel accomplished.
Yeah, and like, I'm gonna talk about Spider-Verse because I'm in love with Spider-Verse. But
Who isn't? If you aren't,
I know. I don't even feel sorry about it. I think that has one of the best examples of a well-used setup and payoff
For sure.
in recent movie history. And it's a leap of faith. That's a great one. The I love you to the dad is a great one. And of course, the shoulder touch. So hey, that's a great one. And I don't know, there's something about with when you go into that dark room and the screen's that big and the sound's that large and you take in a story for 2 hours and you can plant little seeds that allow your mind to take it in, but if it's done really well, you don't notice it, and then if it's done even better, it'll come back in a meaningful way. And it creates a visceral effect, I think, if they really layer it well within the character and the plot that they just spent 2 hours creating.
So when is it meaningful and when is it not, is my question.
When you care about the character.
Yeah, and I also think it's one of those things where less is more. Like, if you are constantly doing setup and payoffs, it almost becomes like fanfare. Like, as much as people love Endgame, Endgame to me feels like a lot of fanfare, a lot of setup and payoff, a lot of, all right, guys, here we go.
On your left,
we're gonna, we're gonna put everything that audience really wants into that movie because they already.
Isn't it just one big payoff movie though?
It's one big payoff, but when you dissect it, it's a bunch of little payoffs that create one huge payoff.
Yeah, and also it references Back to the Future very heavily.
It does. It does.
I don't know if I fully agree with, like, you can do it too much, because I think that is what we remember Back to the Future for, is that it just does it a lot. I honestly am not sure. Like, one setup and payoff that I think is effective in Back to the Future is the conversation between Biff and George, where it's like the exact same thing in the 50s and the 80s. Like, if my handwriting was on your handwriting was on my papers, McFly, I'll get expelled, whatever. Like, I see the purpose of that. Like, it's showing it's exactly the same then as it is now. Nothing has changed. But then there's other things where I don't know if it's actually serving any purpose. It's just kind of there to be like, hey, remember this line? That line was said before. So closure, question mark. I think there just has to be the TV show that they watch. Like, why is, like, it's a good little comedic moment. Like, there's irony there with, like, what's a rerun. But I don't feel like that's serving any larger purpose than just kind of being like a setup for a joke.
I think that's more an Easter egg and just like I put that just with the set design and just I think any TV show could have been playing on that TV. They just needed to have it be the same episode as they were watching in 85 to 55 just because I think the filmmaker was probably so determined to have the consistency between that just so that the parallel was so heavy. Like they're literally having dinner about Uncle Joey's parole, and then you finally meet Uncle Joey and he's behind bars as a baby.
That's always been my favorite joke in the movie. Get
Yeah.
used to those bars, kid.
That's so messed up to say to a child.
So I think there's a lot that they're just trying to like keep together. My favorite payoff is him playing at the dance, just because that's like the one thing he wanted to do. And the person was like, "You're just too darn loud. We can't have you playing at the dance here in 1985." And then he has to play at the dance to save his own life. So that's one payoff that I feel they work in well.
And cut to 21st century clubs where you can't hear yourself speak.
Yes,
Yeah.
with Chuck Berry.
With Chuck Berry.
Yeah, Chuck Berry, man.
I want to test this with another Endgame callback. Is I Am Iron Man a purposeful callback, or is that just fan service?
I would be in the purposeful pool.
So what purpose is it serving then?
I think it's just I'm looking at it two layers. My first layer, if you're looking at it on a practical layer, he is defeating the big evil that this character has been preaching about for the past, I don't even know how many movies Iron Man's in. And he finally has that moment. I think that on that layer is very purposeful and very intentional. I think allowing for it to be personified or symbolized on screen through the line "I am Iron Man" is fan servicey, but enough to the point where since it's still leaning into the character and his final arc, it kind of pulls a more visceral emotion, and it's not so much of like a throwaway like some of the other references might have been. Like, and not to jump to a different movie, but it's fresher in my head. Like with No Way Home, when Willem Dafoe's like, I'm a bit of a scientist myself. Like that
That's
doesn't
just for the memes,
exactly.
I think.
Exactly. But I don't think I Am Iron Man is that. Whereas something like that, which is literally just for the
Fan
memes, is so
service.
clearly fan service.
Jelani, what do you think of, is it purposeful or not?
Ditto with what Dave said. All of it.
The thing that's making me think it's purposeful, I guess, is that he's kind of, when he says it at the end of the first Iron Man, he's kind of doing it to be like, it's sort of like a vain thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he does it in Endgame, it's a moment of sacrifice. So, like, it is pointing to his arc.
It also shows in the first one the secret identities aren't going to matter in the MCU, which is kind of true.
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's also to that point, like that maybe he identifies more now as Iron Man than as Tony Stark. And I guess maybe that's completed by the end. I don't know. Maybe somebody could write a 10-page essay about that. But
You know, it was fan service. Avengers Assemble. That was fan
yeah,
service.
yeah,
That's
that I
pure
think is
fan
basically
service.
just fan service.
That's not harking back to anything. That's just people wanting that line to finally be on screen. And it's cool. They earn it. So
A lot of
Pop
things
off.
in that movie are earned.
Yeah. Have either of you seen the animated movie The Croods?
No, not fully. Like the Cave Family or something, right?
Yeah, I'm bringing it up because that's a movie. I don't love it, but that is definitely a movie where it also has a ton of like lines that are set up and used one way earlier on, and then in the third act they bring them all back and they're kind of like showing growth for the characters. I just was gonna make a comparison there.
What about B movie when his parents tell him not to fly in rain, and then it rains, and he's like, I can't fly in rain.
Word. No, I think it's a good point. It's just no, I shouldn't have said it like that. That is a good point. It's just that it's a movie.
I'm all over the place today. I'm sorry.
I think it's a valid point though, because you set up a danger, like that is doing something functional. I don't think it's doing anything great, but like that is a purposeful thing.
The B movie does everything great, Evan.
Well, sure, if you want it to. Um, I'm not going to take a stance on that. People are too opinionated about the B movie.
Yeah.
You don't want them to swarm you.
That hurt.
Did it sting, Jelani?
One other example I wanted to point to is the way that some of the world building is done in the Harry Potter series. And I don't know if we want to qualify this as setups and payoffs, but like in that series, more so the books than the movies, whenever the kids learn about like some specific spell or plant or potion in class, like it's usually presented as just like, we're going to learn this thing today. But usually, not always, but oftentimes, it'll come up later. Like, the classic example is Wingardium Leviosa. They learn that, and then, like a week later in the time of that movie, Ron uses that spell to knock out the troll. But then they do it with, like, a few other things, with, like, I think the mandrakes in the second book.
Yeah, the werewolf in the third one.
Yeah, the werewolf in the third one. There's some good setups.
The fourth one, they do all the torture spells, and then Harry gets it from Voldemort in the end.
Oh yeah, that's a big one with the unforgivable curses. Yeah, like, but I think what is great about the way setups and payoffs are done there is that, much like Back to the Future, they're kind of disguised. So it kind of just seems like just this fun little world building thing where it's like, oh, this is a cool spell, but then it actually ends up serving a purpose later. And to compare to at least one other thing from that series, the first Fantastic Beasts movie has a lot of world building done, but it kind of only exists for its own sake. All those creatures that are in that movie, like, they don't really matter outside of like Newt Scamander playing Pokemon for 2 hours trying to catch them. So I guess maybe that could be an example of like comparing setups and payoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to these stories have a strict structure, and the structure allows for exploitation and consistency. And when it's consistent, I think there's an effect and there's an arc that can be put on display. But I mean, I'm sure there's, a bunch of other movies where the inconsistencies make these callbacks lessen because set-offs aren't paid off. And you're like, well, we just left that storyline. Like, I love Ridley Scott, and not to get off Back to the Future, but I watched The House of Gucci recently, and there's a lot in that movie that it's like one movie for 2/3, and then it's just completely goes a hard right turn, and like Lady Gaga's not on screen for a lot of it after that. Like, she carries almost every scene until like the halfway through the second act, and then it focuses like a lot on Adam Driver, and it's just such a weird shift, and I'm like, none of this is paying off what we just set up, and it doesn't, you don't feel fulfilled.
I don't know if that's necessarily setups and payoffs there, though. I was definitely underwhelmed by House of Gucci, but to me that felt more like it falling prey to basic biopic things. But in either case, like, I think both the things we're talking about have to do with the satisfaction of an ending. I've definitely heard a couple of professors say, like, nobody will really remember like a bad second act if you really deliver on the ending. And I think there is truth to that. So maybe that is part of like the setup payoff thing.
Yeah.
Is that like, because I guess you could almost argue that every story is just one large setup and payoff.
Mm-hmm.
Mysteries was another thing I wanted to bring up, because I think the difference between a mystery that hits well and one that doesn't, or at least a major difference, is does the reveal involve things that the audience has already seen? I think I've mentioned this on a couple of other episodes, but one technique that really annoys me is what Guy Ritchie does a lot, where he'll have a reveal, but it involves him showing you like half of a scene where you saw some of it, but he didn't show you all of it. And then in the reveal, he shows you what you didn't see. So it's like, yes, it's a reveal, but also you cheated, because that's not you like putting something under our nose that we didn't notice. You just straight up didn't show it to us. So I think that does reduce the satisfaction, or like how much that reveal can hit. I guess maybe that's the main thing, is just like if you tie elements back, that counts for something, even if it's not even that effective, I guess, or purposeful. I said it was going to be one last question, but I'll throw in another one. Can either of you think of like examples of like a callback that you really roll your eyes at? Not necessarily in Back to the Future. I'm going to take that as a no.
No, it's going to take time. I
honestly can't think of any either, but I feel like I have.
I know there are some, but like I try to block out the things I don't like.
It's probably something that I haven't rewatched ever. I feel like there's definitely some kids movie that does that I'm just not thinking of. The only thing I'll add is that I did see this time, you mentioned it earlier, David, but I really felt a Tom Holland vibe from Michael J. Fox in this. Because this was the first time I'd seen it since knowing who Tom Holland was, and they feel really similar, I think.
Yeah, I think they fit the same kind of slot in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Confused?
Yeah, confused, like Twinkie White Boy, teen heartthrob.
Well, their voices are even kind of the same.
God, you can't be serious.
God, you're so. You guys gotta play, because if you don't play.
Oh man, Davis is the wildest shit. It's hilarious.
Okay. So some upcoming episodes, not necessarily in this order, but probably Beetlejuice and Steve Jobs is my next pick. Check out our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our Patreon for $1 a month, where we have bonus episodes. Our merchandise is on Zazzle. Our logo is by Kelsey Hendry. You can follow the show on Twitter at INTAnalysis18. I am on Twitter at ev_Wes. And where are both of you?
I'm on Twitter at Jelani T. Kelly, and I changed my Instagram name to Jelani T. Kelly as well, so it's easy to find, all one word. Oh, my YouTube base Phoenix still. That's it.
I am on Twitter nowhere, and I am on Instagram at David's Instagram account.
David just posts shit to his story.
I do. I post a lot of shit to my story that I just see throughout my day that I just like to spread around, and it goes to whoever it goes to, and hopefully it brightens their day. Recently, I posted a rest in peace meatloaf meme, and it was Rosie O'Donnell's face. I also posted a meme where it was
Betty White.
It was Betty White, but it was Bob Saget. Bob Saget asked Betty White, "What's for dinner?" And Betty White says meatloaf.
Wow.
I don't get that.
Because Meatloaf
all
died.
three of them died recently.
Who's Meatloaf?
He's the rock and roll guy. When we watch Rocky Horror Picture Show, we'll get to him. You'll meet Meatloaf in Rocky Horror Picture Show.
He's also in Fight Club.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the only thing I know him from.
Should I know who Meatloaf is, Evan? Van Halen?
I'm more surprised.
Chuck Berry.
Van Halen.
Chuck Berry?
Well, I know Chuck Berry because of this movie, but I know Van Halen because I've lived in America since the 1980s and have a radio.
Since the 1980s? You're that old?
See, that's the problem. You have a radio. I don't have a radio.
Look, iTunes didn't exist for the first however many years of my life.
iTunes has always existed. Forever.
Well, interesting, because we'll go into that on Steve Jobs in a couple episodes.
Who plays Steve Jobs and Steve Jobs?
Ashton
It's the
Kutcher?
Michael Fassbender one.
Oh,
'Cause
okay.
there's the other one with Ashton Kutcher. I'm doing the Michael Fassbender one.
Oh, Jobs. It's just Jobs. That's the Ashton Kutcher
Yeah.
one, right?
And is this the Aaron Sorkin one?
Yep, it's going to be
Okay.
our first Sorkin episode.
I thought you wanted to do the Social Network for that. I wanted to watch Andrew
Oh no,
Garfield.
we're gonna do the Social Network someday, but this is I don't want to jump in with his biggest thing first. I want to start with Steve Jobs. Same reason I started with Dunkirk as our first Nolan.
Ew.
Well, you don't want to do the best ones first.
That's gross, man.
Put that away, Nolan.
What?
Put your Dunkirk away.
Whatever. Okay. Let's sign off. All right. See you guys next time. And I don't know where we're going. We don't need roads.
Yeah, that's true.
If your mom tries to bang you, stay away.
Yep. Yeah. Words of you heard it here first. Actually, hopefully it wasn't first here, because then there's problems. All right.
This has nothing to do with anything, but I really want some like soft pretzels right now.
Interesting.
Word.
Straight from the mall. Straight from the mall. I'm sorry. Continue.
But so
Soft pretzel. Going off of soft pretzels.
okay.